The Alpha King's banquet was supposed to be untouchable. A night when power draped itself in silk and wolves with centuries-old bloodlines clinked crystal goblets beneath chandeliers that cost more than entire villages. Every alpha, every beta, every warrior of rank had gathered under Magnus Thornclaw's roof, their allegiances fragile, their smiles sharp as knives. And there, pressed against the marble columns where shadows offered the only mercy, stood Annie Graves, an Omega, the lowest rank a wolf could bear, and still be called Pack. Most wolves in that hall didn't know her name. The ones who did had learned to forget it. Then Xander Blackwood saw her. The warrior who'd shoved her into the mud during combat training and told her she'd never be anything but a liability. The wolf who declared her too weak to deserve a place among real fighters. Tonight, drunk on imported wine and the arrogance of a man who'd never faced consequences, he crossed the gleaming marble floor with purpose. He stopped 3 feet from her, pointed his finger at her face like she was a punchline, and laughed, loud enough that conversations died, heads turned, and the room's attention shifted to the Omega who dared show her face among her betters. The hall froze. The music stumbled into silence. Every eye fixed on the spectacle of Xander Blackwood mocking the weakest wolf in the realm. What Xander didn't know, what no one beyond the Alpha King's inner sanctum knew, was that the Omega he was humiliating wasn't just another low-rank wolf trying to blend into the background. She was Magnus Thornclaw's fated mate, her soul bound to his through an ancient seal designed to hide her from enemies who would use her as a weapon. And Xander's mockery shattered it. The seal exploded in a surge of silver-gold light that erupted from Annie's shoulder, burning through fabric and flesh to reveal the sovereign moon mark, a divine blessing that hadn't graced a wolf's skin in over 1,000 years. Power flooded the hall like a tidal wave, dropping weaker wolves to their knees, cracking the marble beneath her feet. Magnus didn't roar, didn't shift, didn't cross the room in a fury. He rose from his throne with the slow, deliberate calm of a predator who just watched his prey make a fatal mistake. And when his eyes met Annie's across the chaos, something ancient and terrible awakened between them. The Alpha King didn't punish Xander Blackwood. He thanked him. Because that moment of cruelty had just unleashed the queen the prophecy promised, the one who would either unite the realm or burn it to ash. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. I love seeing how far across the world our stories reach. And if you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button right now because, trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. Annie Graves hadn't always been invisible. There was a time, years ago, when she believed her wolf would come, that her rank would rise, that she'd find her place among the pack. Annie Graves hadn't always been invisible. There was a time, years ago, when she believed her wolf would come, that her rank would rise, that she'd find her place among the pack. She'd been 16 when the last shred of hope died, the night of her first shift ceremony when every wolf her age gathered under the full moon to meet their inner beasts for the first time. She'd stood in that circle, feeling the moon's pull like everyone else, her heart pounding with anticipation. One by one, her peers had shifted, bones cracking, for sprouting, howls echoing through the forest. And Annie had stood there, human and trembling, while the pack elders exchanged knowing glances and her mother's face crumpled with disappointment. Wolfless, they'd whispered. The word followed her everywhere after that, whispered in hallways, muttered during training sessions, used as justification for why she couldn't eat with the ranked wolves, couldn't train with the warriors, couldn't matter. Xander Blackwood had made it his personal mission to remind her of her place. He'd been a year older, already showing promise as a future warrior, his wolf strong and his combat skills sharper than most. The first time he'd knocked her into the mud during a training exercise, he'd stood over her and said, "You don't belong here, Omega. You're wasting everyone's time." It hadn't been the last time. For 3 years, Xander had used her as a punching bag, sometimes literally when the trainers weren't watching. He'd trip her during runs, sabotage her equipment, turn her name into a verb among the younger wolves. "Don't pull an Annie," they'd say when someone failed a drill. She'd learned to make herself small. Learn to arrive early and leave late to avoid crowds. Learn to eat alone, train alone, exist alone in a pack that had decided she wasn't worth the effort of inclusion. Then came the fire. It had started in the pack's community center on a Tuesday afternoon. Faulty wiring in a building that should have been condemned years ago. Annie had been walking past when she'd heard the screams, seen smoke pouring from the second-floor windows where the pack ran its childcare program. A dozen pups trapped inside, and the adult wolves were frozen, their instinct screaming at them that fire was death, that running toward it was suicide. Annie didn't think. She grabbed a coat someone had dropped, soaked it in the fountain, and ran inside. The smoke had been suffocating, the heat unbearable, but she'd moved through it with a clarity she'd never experienced before. She'd found the children huddled in a corner, terrified and crying, and she'd led them out one by one, making 3 trips back into that inferno until every child was safe. She'd collapsed on the grass afterward, her lungs screaming, her skin blistered, barely conscious. And when she'd opened her eyes, Alpha King Magnus Thornclaw had been kneeling beside her. He'd been visiting the pack on diplomatic business, observing their operations. He'd watched her run into that fire 3 times while wolves twice her size had stood paralyzed. "What's your name?" he'd asked, his voice low and commanding. "Annie Graves, Your Majesty," she'd whispered. "I'm nobody, just an Omega." Magnus had smiled, not with pity, but with something that looked almost like recognition. "No wolf who runs into fire to save children is nobody," he'd said. Then he'd done something that changed everything. He touched her hand, and the mate bond had snapped into place like a lightning strike. The courtship had been secret by necessity. Magnus had enemies, wolves who would use a mate against him, especially one as vulnerable as an Omega with no pack protection. He'd visited her in the dead of night, taken her to hidden locations where they could talk without being seen. He'd told her about the ancient bond seal, a magic his grandmother had taught him that could hide their connection until she was ready to be revealed. "I won't force this on you," Magnus had said the night he'd proposed the seal. "Being my mate means danger, politics, enemies who will see you as a weakness to exploit. But I also won't walk away from what we are. So we wait. We hide the bond until you're strong enough to stand beside me." The ceremony had taken place in a moonlit clearing with only Magnus, most trusted advisor, as witness. Ancient words spoken in a language older than the packs themselves, and then the seal had settled over her like a second skin, invisible, protective, isolating. She'd felt the bond humming beneath it, a constant reminder that she belonged to someone even if the world couldn't see it. For 3 months, she'd lived between 2 worlds. By day, she was still Annie Graves, the wolfless Omega everyone ignored. By night, she was Magnus' mate, learning what it meant to be loved by someone who saw her worth. And then came the banquet. She shouldn't have gone. Magnus had offered to keep her away, to maintain the illusion a while longer. But Annie had been tired of hiding, tired of being afraid, and she'd insisted. "I want to be there," she'd said. "Even if they don't know who I am. I want to stand in that room and know I belong." She'd been managing it too, keeping to the edges, watching Magnus command the room from his throne. And then Xander had noticed her. His eyes had gone wide with mock surprise, his lips curling into that familiar, cruel smile. He'd cut through the crowd with the confidence of a wolf who'd never been told no, who'd never faced consequences for his cruelty. And when he'd stopped in front of her and pointed, that single gesture of contempt that reduced her to a joke, she'd felt something crack inside her chest. Not her spirit. The seal. The sovereign moon mark had exploded to life across her shoulder in a cascade of silver-gold light that sent Xander stumbling backward, his face going pale. The divine mark burned through her dress, through her skin, branding itself onto her for every wolf in that hall to see. Power surged through her veins like wildfire, and for the first time in her life, Annie felt her wolf, not emerging, but there, present, awake, furious. The marble floor cracked beneath her feet. Crystal glasses shattered on tables. And across the hall, Magnus rose from his throne, his eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made her knees weak. Xander was on his knees now, his earlier bravado evaporating as he realized what he'd just done. Around them, wolves dropped into submission, their instincts recognizing the sovereign moon mark even if their minds couldn't process it. Annie looked at the warrior who'd spent years telling her she was nothing, and she understood. The seal had needed violence to break, not physical, but emotional. It had needed her to be pushed to the edge one final time. And Xander, in his arrogance, had given her exactly that. The wolf inside Annie wasn't gentle about announcing its presence. It crashed into her consciousness like a wave breaking over rocks, wild, feral, and furious at being caged for 22 years. Her senses exploded outward in a disorienting rush that nearly sent her to her knees. She could smell everything. The wine spilled on marble 3 tables away, sweat and fear radiating from Xander's pores, the underlying scent of dozens of wolves carefully masked by cologne and perfume. She could hear conversations happening across the massive hall, heartbeats thundering like war drums, the whisper of fabric as wolves shifted their weight. Her vision sharpened until she could see individual dust motes floating through candlelight, could read the micro-expressions flickering across faces 50 feet away. Mate, her wolf growled, the word reverberating through Annie's skull.
Protect. Claim. Ours.
Magnus was moving. Not the controlled, diplomatic walk he'd maintained all evening, but the fluid predatory stride of an apex wolf who'd just watched someone disrespect what belonged to him. His aura rolled out before him like a physical force, dropping lower-ranked wolves into involuntary submission, clearing a path straight to where Annie stood with silver-gold light still radiating from her shoulder. Xander tried to speak, his mouth opening and closing uselessly as Magnus stopped in front of him. The Alpha King didn't roar or snarl. He simply looked down at the kneeling warrior with eyes that had gone completely gold, his wolf so close to the surface that his human form seemed barely able to contain it. "You touched what's mine," Magnus said, his voice soft and infinitely more terrifying for it. "Explain why I shouldn't remove your hand from your body." Annie felt the violence coiling in him through their bond, now fully exposed and blazing between them like a live wire. She felt his rage, his need to destroy the threat, the ancient instinct demanding he defend his mate with blood. Part of her, the part that had spent years being Xander's punching bag, wanted to let him. But she'd learned something in those months with Magnus. Strength wasn't just the ability to destroy. Sometimes it was choosing not to. "Magnus," she said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the chaos raging inside her. "Don't." He turned to her, and the gold in his eyes flickered. Around them, the hall had gone silent except for whispered prayers from wolves smart enough to know they were watching something dangerous unfold. "He humiliated you," Magnus said, "in front of the entire realm." "He broke the seal," Annie countered, stepping closer until she stood beside him. "He gave me this." She gestured to the still-glowing sovereign moon mark. "I won't let him take anything else from me. Not my mercy. Not my choice." Something shifted in Magnus' expression, pride breaking through the fury. He reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining, and the moment they touched, their combined power pulsed through the hall like a heartbeat. That's when the windows exploded inward. Glass rained down in lethal shards as wolves poured through the shattered openings, at least 30 of them moving with coordinated precision. But these weren't normal wolves. Their eyes glowed crimson, foam dripping from their jaws, their movements jerky and wrong, like puppets controlled by broken strings. Shadow cursed. Annie knew it instinctively, the sovereign moon mark burning hot against her shoulder as it recognized the corruption. The banquet hall erupted into chaos. Ranked wolves shifted mid-leap, meeting the attackers with claws and fangs. Tables overturned, sending crystal and food crashing to the floor. Someone screamed. The metallic scent of blood filled the air. A cursed wolf broke through the defensive line, heading straight for Annie with single-minded focus. Magnus moved to intercept, but Annie's instincts fired first. She raised her hand, not knowing what she was doing, only that the mark was burning and her wolf was snarling and something ancient was rising inside her. Silver light erupted from her palm, slamming into the corrupted wolf like a physical blow. The creature howled, its red eyes flickering as the darkness writhed under her power. Then the corruption burned away like fog under sunlight, and the wolf collapsed, its eyes fading to normal brown. Annie stared at her hand, trembling. Around her, the battle raged, but she felt the mark pulsing with purpose, showing her what it could do. She turned toward another cursed wolf and unleashed the light again, watching it purge the shadow curse in seconds. The Sovereign Queen. Someone breathed nearby. The prophecy was real. But the attack was ending, the cursed wolves either purged by Annie's power or killed by Magnus' guards. The coordinated assault had lasted less than 3 minutes, and now the hall stood in ruins, wounded wolves being tended to while others guarded the broken windows. Magnus pulled Annie against him, checking her for injuries with hands that shook slightly. "You're not hurt," he demanded. "I'm fine," she said, though her legs felt like water. "Magnus, that attack, it was too organized. They came straight for me." "I know," he said grimly. His eyes swept the hall, landing on a figure standing near the ruined head table. Gregor, Magnus' senior advisor for the past decade, was backing toward a side exit. His expression was carefully neutral, but his scent, Annie could smell it now with her heightened senses, reeked of guilt and fear. "Gregor," Magnus called, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Stay where you are." The advisor froze, then bolted. He made it 3 steps before Magnus Spada tackled him to the ground, silver chains appearing from somewhere to bind his wrists. They dragged Gregor back to the center of the hall, forcing him to his knees. Magnus approached slowly, each step deliberate. "How long?" he asked quietly. Gregor said nothing. "How long have you been working for my cousin?" Magnus' voice dropped to a growl. The hall went deathly silent. Annie felt her blood turn to ice. Victor Thornfong. Magnus had told her about him during one of their secret nights together. His cousin who'd tried to overthrow the throne 15 years ago, who'd been defeated and supposedly executed for treason. "Victor is dead," someone said. The execution was public. The execution was theater. A new voice called from the shadows near the broken windows. A figure stepped into the candlelight, tall, dark-haired, with features so similar to Magnus they could have been brothers instead of cousins. But where Magnus' eyes held honor and controlled power, Victor's held only hunger and madness. He smiled at Annie, and the expression made her skin crawl. "Hello, cousin," he said to Magnus without breaking eye contact with her. "I see you finally found your sovereign queen. How convenient. I've been waiting 1,000 years for her to appear." Magnus shifted partially, his wolf pushing through as he positioned himself between Annie and Victor. "You're supposed to be dead." "I got better," Victor said with mock cheerfulness. 15 years in hiding gives you time to plan. Time to build an army. Time to wait for the one thing that could give me absolute power." His eyes fixed on the sovereign moon mark glowing on Annie's shoulder. "And now she's finally here." He vanished back into the shadows before anyone could move, his laughter echoing through the broken hall. "I'll be seeing you soon, little Omega. Very soon." Elder Miriam arrived at dawn, when the shattered banquet hall still reeked of blood and dark magic. She was ancient, over 500 years old, her white hair bound in intricate braids, her eyes milky with cataracts that somehow saw more than any wolf with perfect vision. She'd been the realm's keeper of prophecies since before Magnus' grandfather had taken the throne. She walked straight to Annie, ignoring every protocol, and placed gnarled fingers on the sovereign moon mark that still glowed faintly beneath Annie's borrowed shirt. The touch sent a jolt through Annie's system, and for a moment, she saw flashes, wolves bowing before a silver queen, darkness spreading across territories, fire and ash and rebirth. "The sovereign returns in the realm's darkest hour," Miriam said, her voice like wind through autumn leaves. Just as the prophecy promised. They'd moved to Magnus' private war room, a circular chamber deep in the palace where maps covered every wall and guards stood at attention outside. Annie sat across from Miriam while Magnus paced like a caged animal, his wolf still too close to the surface after Victor's appearance. "Tell her what it means," Magnus said tersely. "All of it." Miriam's cloudy eyes fixed on Annie with unsettling focus. The sovereign moon mark appears once every millennium to a wolf chosen by the moon goddess herself. You can sense corruption in any wolf soul, see the darkness before it spreads. Command absolute loyalty from those who hear your voice. Purge shadow curses with a touch. She paused. And if corrupted yourself, you become the greatest weapon ever created. A divine queen turned dark, commanding armies through compulsion rather than choice. Annie's stomach dropped. That's what Victor wants. That's what Victor needs, Miriam corrected. He tried to take the throne through military force 15 years ago and failed because wolves are loyal to Magnus. But if he corrupts you, if he turns the sovereign queen into his puppet, every wolf in the realm would be compelled to obey. The mark doesn't distinguish between rightful commands and force ones. There has to be a way to prevent corruption, Magnus said, finally stopping his pacing. The prophecy wouldn't create a weapon without a defense. Miriam smiled faintly. The defense is simple. A completed mate bond creates a tether, two souls anchored to each other. As long as that bond remains strong, corruption cannot fully take root. The corrupted wolf will fight from within, and their mate will be able to pull them back. Annie felt Magnus' eyes on her, felt the incomplete bond humming between them. They'd sealed it to hide her identity, but they hadn't completed the final step, the claiming bite that would forge them into an unbreakable unit. Then we complete it now, Magnus said. No, Annie said quietly. He stared at her like she'd sprouted a second head. Annie, you told me yourself what completing the bond means, she interrupted. I'll feel every kill you make, every brutal decision, every dark moment required to rule. I've been a wolf for less than 24 hours, Magnus. I don't even know what I am yet. You're my mate, he said fiercely. And I won't risk losing you to Victor's corruption because you're not ready to see the darker parts of me. It's not about being ready, she said, standing to face him. It's about choosing it fully, not out of fear. When we complete this bond, I want it to be because we both want it, not because we're terrified of what happens if we don't. The argument was cut short by a guard bursting through the door, his face pale. Your Majesty, there's been an attack on the Clearwater Pack settlement. Multiple casualties. And he swallowed hard. They took the children. 12 of them. All Omegas. Annie's blood turned to ice. She knew before the guard produced the letter, knew before Magnus' face went white with rage. The message was written in blood on parchment. Trade accepted. The sovereign queen for 12 innocent lives. Midnight tonight at the abandoned Thornwood estate. Come alone or I start sending pieces. It was signed with Victor's seal. Magnus crushed the letter in his fist, his aura exploding outward with such force that the maps on the walls fluttered. He's insane if he thinks I'll allow this. But Annie was already moving toward the door. Magnus caught her arm, spinning her to face him.
No.
Absolutely not. We'll send a tactical team, He'll kill them, Annie said flatly. You know he will. The moment your soldiers get close, those children die and their blood is on our hands. Their blood is on Victor's hands, Magnus snarled. Don't you dare take responsibility for his atrocities. I'm not, she said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. But I am taking responsibility for my choices. And I choose not to let children die when I can prevent it. By walking into a trap, his grip on her arm tightened, not painful but desperate. By letting him corrupt you into a weapon? Annie, if he succeeds, you won't just be lost to me. You'll destroy everything you're trying to protect. She placed her free hand over his heart, feeling it thunder beneath her palm. You said the bond can pull me back. That as long as it exists, corruption can't fully take hold. An incomplete bond might not be strong enough, Miriam interjected quietly. The prophecy speaks of a completed bond, child. What you're proposing is a desperate gamble. Then it's a good thing I've spent my entire life being underestimated, Annie said. She looked up at Magnus, seeing the war raging behind his eyes, the king who couldn't risk the realm's future against the mate who couldn't bear to lose her. I'm not asking for permission. I'm telling you what I'm going to do. You can either help me survive it, or you can watch me go alone. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything they weren't saying. Finally, Magnus pulled her against him, his face buried in her hair. "I'll track you. The moment he makes his move, my forces will be ready." "He'll be expecting that," Annie said into his chest. "I don't care," Magnus growled. "Let him expect it. I'm not losing you to save my pride." Miriam was already pulling items from the leather bag she'd brought, a silver bracelet etched with protective runes, a vial of shimmering liquid, a small crystal that pulsed with warm light. "Wear this. Drink this before you go. Keep this against your skin. They won't stop corruption, but they'll slow it. Buy you time to fight from within." Annie took each item with trembling hands. 12 children. 12 lives that mattered just as little to most wolves as hers once had. 12 omegas who would be forgotten casualties if she didn't act. She thought of the fire, of running into smoke and flame while others stood frozen. She'd never been the strongest wolf, but she'd always been the one willing to burn if it meant someone else survived.
"Midnight," she said.
"I'll be ready." Magnus said nothing, but his arms tightened around her, and through their incomplete bond, she felt his terror and his pride warring in equal measure. When he finally released her, his eyes had gone completely gold. "If he touches you," Magnus said softly, "there won't be enough left of him to bury." The Thornwood estate had been abandoned for decades, its stone walls covered in creeping vines, its windows dark and hollow like empty eye sockets. Annie approached on foot, alone as demanded, the silver bracelet warm against her wrist, and the emergency crystal tucked against her ribs beneath her shirt. She'd drunk Miriam's potion an hour ago, and it sat in her stomach like liquid fire, fortifying her from within. Magnus and his forces were positioned 2 miles out, close enough to respond to the tracking magic, far enough to avoid detection. She felt him through their bond, a constant presence at the edge of her consciousness, terrified and furious, and unable to stop her. The front entrance stood open, inviting. Annie stepped through into darkness that smelled of rot and old magic. Her wolf senses adjusted quickly, picking out details in the gloom. Overturned furniture, bloodstains on marble floors, symbols painted on walls in something that definitely wasn't paint. "Punctual," Victor's voice echoed from somewhere above. "I appreciate that in a queen." Lights flickered to life, torches mounted on walls, revealing a grand staircase and the figure standing at its top. Victor looked different than he had at the banquet, more substantial somehow, as if the shadows themselves were lending him strength. Behind him, Annie could see movement. Children huddled in iron cages, their faces streaked with tears. "Let them go," Annie said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "That was the deal. I'm here." "The deal," Victor said, descending the stairs with predatory grace, "was that you come alone. And yet I can feel Magnus' forces gathering like storm clouds on the horizon. Did you really think I would notice? Did you really think I'd trust you to keep your word?" Annie countered. He laughed, the sound scraping against her nerves. "Fair enough. I suppose honesty is refreshing." He reached the bottom of the stairs, circling her slowly. "Do you know how long I've waited for this? 15 years hiding in the shadows, building my army, searching for the dark magic necessary to corrupt a sovereign queen. 15 years of patience, all leading to this moment." "Why?" Annie asked, genuinely curious beneath her fear. "You could have disappeared, built a life somewhere else. Why this?" "Because Magnus has something I don't," Victor said, stopping in front of her. "Loyalty. Wolves follow him because they want to, not because they're forced to. I tried to take the throne through strength and failed. But you," he gestured to the sovereign moon mark visible through her thin shirt, "you can command absolute obedience. With you under my control, every wolf in the realm becomes mine. Not through respect or honor, but through divine compulsion they can't resist." "I won't help you," Annie said. "You won't have a choice," Victor replied. He snapped his fingers, and 2 shadow-cursed wolves dragged one of the caged children forward, a girl who couldn't have been more than 8, sobbing and shaking. "But I'm feeling generous tonight. I'll give you a choice anyway. One of Victor's wolves produced a vial filled with liquid so black it seemed to absorb the torchlight. The shadow curse in its purest form. Annie could feel the wrongness radiating from it, could see the darkness writhing inside the glass like something alive. "Drink this," Victor said pleasantly, "and surrender yourself to corruption willingly. Or refuse, and I kill one child every 5 minutes until you comply. Either way, you'll drink it eventually. The only question is how many children die first." The little girl was crying harder now, understanding enough to know her life hung in the balance. Annie looked at the other children. 11 more faces pressed against iron bars, terrified and helpless. She thought of Magnus' warnings, of Miriam's concerns about the incomplete bond, of every reason this was a terrible idea. Then she thought of the fire, of running toward smoke while others ran away. "If I drink it, you let them all go immediately," Annie said. "Unharmed. No tricks." Victor's smile widened. "You have my word as a thorn fong." "Your word means nothing," Annie said. "But their lives mean everything." She took the vial from his hand, feeling its unnatural cold even through the glass. Her wolf was screaming inside her mind, desperate and terrified, begging her not to do this. Through the bond, she felt Magnus' anguish spike. He knew what she was about to do. "I'm sorry," she sent through their connection, hoping he could feel it. "But I can't watch children die. Not when I can stop it." She uncorked the vial. The stench that rose from it was overwhelming. Decay and despair, and something fundamentally wrong. Her hands shook as she raised it to her lips. "Annie, wait." Magnus' voice exploded in her mind, so loud it made her wince. "Don't you dare." She drank. The shadow curse hit her system like acid. It burned through her throat, into her stomach, spreading through her veins with vicious speed. Annie collapsed to her knees, the empty vial shattering on the marble. Miriam's potion tried to fight it, creating a war zone inside her body that tore a scream from her throat. Distantly, she heard Victor ordering the children released, heard the cage doors opening and small feet running toward freedom. At least that part worked. At least they'd survive. The darkness was spreading faster now, crawling through her mind like infected roots. She could feel it trying to take control, to smother her consciousness and turn her into a puppet. The sovereign moon mark burned in resistance, fighting the corruption with divine fire, but it wasn't enough. "Fight it," her wolf snarled. "Don't you dare give up."
"Fight."
Annie reached for the crystal hidden against her ribs with fingers that no longer felt like her own. Her vision was going dark at the edges, the curse spreading like poison through every cell. She found the crystal's smooth surface, gripped it with the last of her strength. "Magnus," she thought desperately.
"I'm sorry."
"I love." She crushed the crystal. It shattered in her hand, releasing a pulse of pure energy that would alert Magnus instantly. She felt his response through the bond, rage and terror and desperate determination. He was coming. But Victor was laughing, watching her collapse fully to the floor as the shadow curse claimed the last territories of her mind.
"Too late," he said.
"She's mine now." Annie tried to speak, to move, to do anything, but her body no longer obeyed her commands. The curse had won. She was trapped inside herself, a prisoner screaming in darkness, while something else wore her skin. Her eyes opened, but they weren't hers anymore. They glowed crimson, reflecting the torchlight like a predator's. Victor reached down, helping her to her feet with mock courtesy. "There we are," he said. "Rise, my sovereign queen. We have a realm to conquer." And Annie, trapped in the prison of her own corrupted body, could only scream where no one could hear her. Living inside a body that no longer obeyed her was a special kind of hell. Annie existed in a prison of flesh and bone, fully conscious but completely powerless as the shadow curse piloted her like a meat puppet. She could see through her crimson glowing eyes, could hear conversations, could feel every movement, but she couldn't control any of it. Victor kept her close during those first 3 days, displaying her like a trophy as he moved through his underground stronghold. The fortress stretched beneath the Thornwood estate, a network of tunnels and chambers carved from bedrock, lit by torches that burned with unnatural green flame. Hundreds of shadow-cursed wolves lived down here, their red eyes tracking her movements with mindless devotion. "Behold your sovereign queen," Victor announced to gathered crowds of corrupted wolves, his hand possessive on her shoulder. "She has chosen to stand with us, to lead us to glory." Inside her own head, Annie screamed denials that no one could hear. Her corrupted body stood perfectly still, face blank, while her consciousness raged against the prison walls. The worst part was feeling the sovereign moon mark fighting the curse, divine fire burning through her veins in constant warfare with the darkness. The two forces clashed inside her like armies meeting on a battlefield, neither able to claim total victory. The mark whispered to her sometimes. Not words exactly, but impressions, images of silver light, feelings of warmth and protection, reminders that she wasn't alone even in this darkness. It hurt, that constant internal battle, but it also meant the curse hadn't won completely. Some part of her remained untouched, sealed away behind divine protection. She learned to track time by Victor's routines. Morning briefings with his generals, afternoon training sessions with new recruits, evening interrogations of captured wolves who refused to join him. Her corrupted body stood beside him through all of it, silent and obedient, a living symbol of his power. On the third night, Victor's scouts brought news that made his smile turn vicious. "We caught him." Magnus came for her, just as predicted. They dragged Magnus into the throne room in silver chains that burned his skin wherever they touched. He was bloodied and furious, his golden eyes finding Annie immediately. She saw him flinch at the sight of her crimson gaze, saw the grief flash across his face before rage replaced it. "Magnus," she screamed inside her mind. "I'm still here. I'm still fighting. Please don't give up on me." But he couldn't hear her. No one could. "Your mate came to rescue you," Victor said, forcing Annie's body to walk toward Magnus. "Isn't that touching? Tell him how you feel, my queen." Annie's mouth opened without her permission, and the curse forced words out in her voice, but not her will. "I don't need rescuing. I chose this." She felt Magnus' anguish spike through their bond, still there, still intact despite the corruption. "That's not her," he snarled at Victor. "Annie would never." "Wouldn't she?" Victor circled Magnus slowly. "She drank the poison to save Omega children she'd never met. Walked into my trap knowing exactly what would happen. Your precious mate has a martyr complex, cousin. I simply gave her what she wanted, a chance to sacrifice herself for others." Magnus lunged against his chains, getting within a foot of Victor before guards yanked him back. "When I get out of here, I will end you slowly." "You won't be getting out," Victor said pleasantly. He gestured, and guards dragged Magnus toward the cells, reinforced chambers lined with silver that would weaken him, prevent him from shifting or using his full strength.
"But don't worry.
I'll take excellent care of your mate." Annie watched them throw Magnus into a cell, watched the silver door slam shut, and felt her heart breaking in ways the shadow curse couldn't touch. Inside her prison, she sobbed. Outside, her corrupted face remained expressionless. Days blurred together. Victor used her presence to recruit wolves who'd been waiting for a sign that his cause was righteous. "The sovereign queen stands with us," he told desperate wolves from struggling packs. "The moon goddess's chosen has seen the truth, that strength deserves to rule, not outdated concepts of honor and mercy." Annie's corrupted body stood silent during these speeches, and wolves took her silence as agreement. Victor's forces swelled, not just shadow-cursed wolves now, but willing recruits who believed they were joining the winning side. She watched helplessly as good wolves made terrible choices based on the lie her presence represented. The sovereign moon mark burned hotter with each passing day, fighting the curse with increasing desperation. Sometimes Annie managed to move a finger, to blink deliberately, tiny victories that meant everything in her powerless state. The mark was teaching her to fight from within, showing her that the curse might control her body, but it didn't own her soul. Late one night, when Victor left her alone in the chamber he designated as hers, the mark flared with sudden warmth. Annie felt a presence, ancient and feminine and infinite, flowing through the divine symbol on her shoulder. "Child," a voice whispered directly into her consciousness, bypassing the curse entirely. The moon goddess herself, speaking through the mark. "You are not broken. You are bending, like the willow in the storm. And when the wind passes, you will straighten again." Tears Annie couldn't physically cry streamed down her internal cheeks. "I can't fight this. I can't move. I'm trapped." "You are already fighting," the goddess corrected gently. "Every moment you remain aware, every second you hold on to yourself, you are fighting. The curse wants to erase you, to make you nothing. Your existence is rebellion. But Magnus is closer than you think," the voice said. "The bond still connects you. Incomplete, but present. A thread linking your souls, even through corruption. Pull on that thread, child. Let him know you're still there." The presence faded, leaving Annie with renewed purpose. She focused on the mate bond, that golden thread connecting her to Magnus somewhere in the silver cells below. She'd been so consumed with fighting the curse that she hadn't thought to use the bond deliberately. She reached for it now, pouring every ounce of her consciousness into that connection. "Magnus,
Can you hear me?
I'm still here. Still fighting. Don't give up." The response came immediately, shocked and desperate and overwhelmingly relieved. "Annie? God's Annie, I can feel you. You're still there." "Trapped," she sent back. "But not gone. Not yet. Hold on." Magnus' voice filled her mind with fierce determination. "I'm getting us out of here. Both of us. I swear it." For the first time since drinking the poison, Annie felt something other than despair. Hope. Small and fragile, but real. She might be a prisoner in her own skin, but she wasn't alone. The bond connected them, the mark protected her, and the goddess herself had promised she wasn't broken.
Just bending.
And when the storm passed, she would straighten again. Annie started with her right index finger. For hours, she focused every scrap of willpower on that single digit while her corrupted body stood motionless in the chamber Victor had claimed as hers. The shadow curse fought her, wrapping around her intentions like strangling vines, but the sovereign moon mark burned hot against her shoulder, lending her strength. "Move. Just move." The finger twitched. Half an inch, barely noticeable, but it was hers. Annie wanted to cry with triumph. She pushed further, claiming that finger completely, then the next, and the next until her entire right hand belonged to her again. The curse screamed inside her mind, fighting to reclaim the territory she'd stolen back, but she held firm. It took 2 more days to claim her left hand. Victor noticed nothing. Her corrupted body still followed his commands, still stood silent and obedient during his rallies. But at night, when he left her alone, Annie practiced moving her reclaimed fingers, flexing them in patterns only she could see. The bond with Magnus sustained her. They couldn't speak often. The curse sensed when she reached for the connection and tried to sever it, but stolen moments of contact kept her sane. "Still fighting," she'd send.
Still here.
"I know," Magnus would respond, his presence warm and fierce. "I can feel you getting stronger." On the 7th night of her captivity, Annie claimed her legs. The curse had grown complacent, convinced it had won, and she used that arrogance against it. When Victor's guards changed shifts at midnight and the fortress fell into its deepest silence, Annie made her corrupted body walk. Not toward escape. Victor had wards everywhere that would alert him instantly. Toward the cells. Toward Magnus. Her body moved stiffly, the curse fighting her control with every step, but she pushed through the resistance. Guards saw her passing and bowed, mistaking her midnight wandering for Victor's orders. She descended stone stairs into the dungeons, following the golden thread of the mate bond like a lifeline. Magnus' cell was at the end of a long corridor, reinforced with silver and dark magic. He sat against the far wall, his skin marked with burns where the chains had touched him, his eyes closed in meditation or exhaustion. But the moment her footsteps echoed in the corridor, his head snapped up. Their eyes met through the bars, her crimson his gold, and something passed between them that didn't need words. Annie couldn't speak yet, The curse still controlled her voice. But during their secret courtship, Magnus had taught her the hand signals used by his elite guards for silent communication during stealth missions. She raised her reclaimed right hand, fingers moving in deliberate patterns.
Still me.
Still fighting. Magnus surged to his feet, ignoring the silver chains that burned him, his face transforming with hope and anguish. His hands moved in response, quick and precise. How much control? Hands.
Legs.
Working on the rest. Her fingers trembled with effort, the curse trying to force them still. The bond, Magnus signed desperately. We need to complete it. It's the only way to burn out the curse. Annie's hands faltered. She'd considered this, had felt the incomplete bond straining between them, but the risk terrified her.
Could corrupt you too, she signed.
I don't care. His hands moved with vehement certainty. Annie, you can't fight this alone. The bond will give you an anchor, something to pull yourself back to.
Please.
If it goes wrong, then we go down together, he signed. I'd rather die at your side than live watching you fade. Complete the bond. Bite me. Let me share this burden. The curse sensed her intentions and surged, trying to force her body away from the cell. Annie fought it with everything she had, her hands gripping the silver bars despite the pain that erupted where her skin touched the metal. The sovereign moon mark flared white-hot, burning away the curse's grip inch by inch. She reached through the bars with shaking hands, cupping Magnus' face. His skin was warm beneath her palms, real and solid and hers. The mate bond sang between them, incomplete but desperate, begging to be finished. I love you. She signed with one hand, the other still holding him. Whatever happens. I love you too, he signed back. Then aloud, his voice rough with emotion. Do it. Finish this. Annie pulled him as close as the bars allowed, tilted his head to expose his throat, and felt her canines extend, the first time she'd controlled that transformation. The curse howled inside her, trying to stop her, but the moon goddess's whispered words echoed through her mind. You are not broken. She bit down. The mate bond exploded. Power surged through both of them. Magnus' ancient alpha bloodline meeting her sovereign moon mark in a collision that shattered the silver bars between them. The shadow curse screamed as divine fire burned through Annie's veins, purging the corruption with ruthless efficiency. Annie felt her consciousness slam back into full control of her body as the curse's hold shattered. She collapsed against Magnus, who caught her despite his chains, both of them shaking with the force of the completed bond. She could feel everything now, his pain from the silver, his fierce joy at having her back, his wolf singing with triumph. And her own wolf, dormant for so long, finally fully awakened. The shift took her without warning. Bones restructured, fur erupted across her skin, and suddenly she was standing on 4 legs instead of 2. Magnus stared at her with wonder written across his face. Annie's wolf was massive, larger than any Omega should be, her fur silver white and glowing with lunar light. The sovereign moon mark blazed across her shoulder even in wolf form, visible as a constellation of stars against her pelt. Power radiated from her in waves, making the very stones of the fortress tremble. She threw back her head and howled, a sound of freedom and fury and fierce joy. The sound echoed through the dungeons, through the entire underground stronghold, announcing to everyone that the sovereign queen had returned. And she was done being a prisoner. Annie's claws tore through Magnus' silver chains like they were paper, the sovereign moon mark lending her strength that defied natural law. He shifted the moment his hands were free, a massive black wolf with gold eyes that burned like suns, and together they exploded out of the cell in a shower of twisted metal and stone. Alarms shrieked through the fortress. Shadow-cursed wolves poured into the corridor from both directions, their red eyes gleaming with mindless aggression. But Annie and Magnus moved as one unit now, their completed bond allowing them to anticipate each other's movements with perfect synchronization. Magnus took the left flank, his jaws closing around throats with brutal efficiency. Annie moved right, but she didn't kill. The sovereign moon mark guided her instincts, showing her what she could do. She slammed her glowing paw against a cursed wolf's chest, and silver light erupted from the contact point. The corruption burned away instantly. The wolf collapsed, its red eyes fading to normal amber, confusion replacing the mindless rage. It looked up at Annie with dawning awareness and whimpered, What happened to me?" "You were enslaved," Annie said, her wolf's voice deeper than her human one but unmistakably hers. "But you're free now." More cursed wolves attacked, and Annie met each one with purifying light instead of violence. One by one, they collapsed as she burned the shadow curse from their souls, leaving behind confused and grateful wolves who'd been prisoners just like her. They fought their way through 3 levels of the stronghold, leaving a trail of freed wolves in their wake. Magnus' power cleared the path, while Annie's healed those who'd been corrupted. The freed wolves followed them, their numbers growing with each chamber they breached, until Annie had an army at her back. Then she heard it, children crying. The sound cut through the battle noise like a knife, pulling her toward a reinforced door marked with dark symbols. She shifted back to human form, not caring about her nakedness, and pressed her hands against the door. The sovereign moon mark blazed, and the dark magic, sealing it, shattered. Inside, she found them. Not just the 12 Omega children Victor had kidnapped, but dozens more, children stolen from packs across the territories over months or years. They were imprisoned in cages made of cursed iron that burned their skin, their faces hollow with fear and starvation. Rage unlike anything Annie had ever felt exploded through her. The sovereign moon mark erupted with light, so bright the freed wolves behind her had to shield their eyes. She walked to the first cage and gripped the bars, ignoring the dark magic that tried to burn her. Her power was stronger. The cage disintegrated. The child inside, a boy who couldn't have been more than 6, stared at her with wide eyes. "You're glowing," he whispered. "I know," Annie said gently, reaching for the next cage. "Don't be afraid. I'm getting you out." Magnus appeared beside her in human form, using his alpha strength to tear apart cages, while she purified the curses woven into the metal. The freed wolves joined in, careful with the frightened children, murmuring reassurances. Within minutes, every child was free. They huddled together, clinging to each other and the wolves who'd been cursed just moments ago. Annie looked at the faces around her, wolves who'd been Victor's slaves, now standing protectively around the children he'd imprisoned, and felt something shift in the air. One of the freed wolves, a scarred male who looked like he'd been cursed for years, dropped to his knees before her. "Sovereign Queen," he said, his voice cracking, "I pledge my life to you. My loyalty, my service, everything I am." Another wolf knelt, then another, until the entire chamber was filled with bowing heads. "We were lost," a female wolf said, tears streaming down her face. "Trapped in our own minds, forced to commit atrocities. You gave us ourselves back. We are yours." Annie felt the weight of their devotion through the sovereign moon mark, not compulsion, but genuine choice. These wolves weren't kneeling because divine magic forced them to. They were kneeling because she'd freed them when no one else would. "Then rise," she said, her voice carrying authority she'd never possessed before. "Rise as free wolves. And if you choose to stand with me, let it be because you believe in what we're fighting for, a realm where no wolf is enslaved, where children aren't stolen, where power serves justice instead of ambition." They rose as one, and Annie saw it in their eyes. Purpose, determination, the fierce loyalty of wolves who'd been given a second chance. She had an army now, but not Victor's kind of army. These wolves followed her because they wanted to, because she represented something worth fighting for. "Victor still has hundreds of cursed wolves under his control," Magnus said quietly beside her. "And he knows you're free now. He'll be coming with everything he has." "Good," Annie said, feeling her wolf's hunger for justice burning beneath her skin. "Let him come. I'm done running. I'm done hiding. And I'm definitely done being his prisoner." She looked at the freed wolves, at the rescued children, at Magnus standing beside her with absolute faith in his eyes. "We're going to end this. Not with more enslavement, not with corruption, but by freeing every wolf Victor has trapped. We're going to show him that true power doesn't come from forcing others to obey, It comes from giving them something worth believing in. The sovereign moon mark pulsed with approval, and Annie felt the moon goddess's presence briefly, a whisper of pride and encouragement. She'd bent in the storm, just as promised. And now, straightened and stronger for it, she was ready to become the queen the prophecy had promised. Not the queen Victor wanted to create. The queen the realm needed. The throne room doors exploded inward under the combined force of Annie's light and Magnus' raw strength. Victor sat waiting on a throne carved from black stone, his expression caught between fury and something that looked almost like anticipation. Behind Annie and Magnus, their army filled the corridor, freed wolves, rescued children guarded by the fiercest fighters, and Magnus' original forces who'd finally breached the fortress. "I underestimated you," Victor said, standing slowly. "I thought the curse would break you. Instead, you broke it. Impressive." "It ends now," Magnus growled, his alpha aura filling the chamber with suffocating pressure. "Surrender, and I'll make your death quick." Victor laughed, the sound echoing off stone walls. "Death? Cousin, I've been dead for 15 years. What's one more execution?" His eyes fixed on Annie, and something hungry moved in their depths. "But tell me, little Omega, do you really think you've won? You freed a few dozen wolves. I've corrupted thousands over the years. This was always going to end one way." He spread his arms, and darkness erupted from his body like a tidal wave. The shadow curse that had corrupted so many wolves was nothing compared to what Victor had done to himself. He'd been drinking it, absorbing it, becoming it for over a decade. His human form shattered, replaced by something monstrous. A wolf, but wrong. Twice the size of any natural creature, its body warped and twisted by dark magic. Shadow tendrils writhed across its fur like living things, its eyes burned crimson, and its jaws dripped corruption. The freed wolves behind Annie whimpered, their instincts screaming at them to run. Even Magnus tensed, his wolf recognizing an apex predator evolved beyond natural law. Annie stepped forward. "Annie, no." Magnus reached for her, but she placed a hand on his arm, stopping him. "This is my fight," she said quietly, her eyes never leaving Victor's monstrous form. "He corrupted me, imprisoned me, used me as a weapon. I need to face him. Not as your mate, not as the sovereign queen. As myself." "You'll die," Magnus said flatly. "Maybe," Annie agreed. "But I've spent my whole life being told I'm too weak to matter. If I hide behind you now, I prove them right." She shifted before he could protest, her silver wolf emerging with lunar light radiating from every hair. The sovereign moon mark blazed across her shoulder like a brand, casting dancing shadows across the throne room. She was smaller than Victor's corrupted form, more delicate, everything an Omega wolf was supposed to be, gentle, weak, insignificant. Victor's massive head tilted, amusement radiating from him. When he spoke, his voice was distorted, layered with darkness. "You want to fight me alone? The wolfless Omega, who couldn't even defend herself in training? This will be entertaining." He lunged. Annie barely dodged, his jaws snapping shut where her throat had been a heartbeat before. She rolled, came up running, and Victor was already there, his massive paw slamming into her side with enough force to shatter ribs. She flew across the throne room, crashing into the stone wall hard enough to crack it. Pain exploded through her body as she collapsed to the floor. Through the bond, she felt Magnus' anguish, felt him fighting every instinct to intervene. "Trust me," she sent desperately. "Please, trust me." Victor stalked toward her, taking his time. "This is what you are, Omega. Weak, broken, worthless. You can wear divine marks and glow with pretty light, but underneath, you're still the pathetic wolf everyone dismissed." Annie struggled to her feet, tasting blood. Her wolf whimpered, but she pushed past the pain. "You're right," she said, surprising him. "I am weak. I've been broken. And for years, I believed I was worthless." Victor's corrupted form loomed over her. "Then why are you still standing?" "Because weak doesn't mean defeated," Annie said. "Broken doesn't mean destroyed. and worthless is what others call you when they're afraid of what you might become. She let the sovereign moon mark's power flood through her, not in careful measures like before, but everything. Every ounce of divine energy the moon goddess had blessed her with, channeled into a single purpose.
Not to destroy.
To heal. Victor sensed what she was doing and lunged to stop her, but she was already moving. Annie threw herself forward, her smaller wolf form diving beneath his attack, and slammed her entire body against his corrupted chest. Light erupted between them. Not the quick purge she'd used on other cursed wolves, but a sustained burn that tore through 15 years of accumulated corruption. Victor screamed, a sound of pure agony that shook the fortress, as the shadow curse fought to maintain its hold. Annie held on despite his thrashing, despite his claws tearing into her back, despite the darkness trying to flow into her through the contact. The completed mate bond with Magnus protected her, anchoring her soul against the corruption's pull. And the sovereign moon mark burned brighter than it ever had, purging the darkness inch by agonizing inch. Victor's monstrous form began to shrink, the shadow tendrils burning away like fog under sunlight. His screams faded to whimpers, then silence. When the light finally dimmed, Annie stumbled backward, exhausted and bleeding, and Victor lay on the cold stone floor in human form.
He looked small now.
Mortal. Powerless. Just a wolf who'd made terrible choices and lost everything in pursuit of power he didn't deserve. Annie shifted back to human, swaying on her feet. Magnus was there instantly, catching her before she fell, but she kept her eyes on Victor. I could have killed you, she said, her voice hoarse. The mark gives me that power.
But I chose mercy instead.
Not because you deserve it, you don't. But because I refuse to become what you tried to make me. Victor stared at her with empty eyes, and for the first time, she saw him clearly. Not as a monster, but as a broken wolf who'd let ambition consume him. Exile him, Annie said to Magnus. Strip his name, his rank, everything. Let him live as a rogue, powerless and forgotten. Death would be mercy. This is justice. Around them, the freed wolves knelt once more, but this time in genuine awe. She'd faced a monster, and one not through violence, but through the very compassion Victor had tried to corrupt. The sovereign queen had risen, and the realm would never be the same. They stripped Victor of everything at dawn. His name, declared void by the Council of Alphas. His rank, removed in a formal ceremony where every pack leader bore witness. Even his family crest was taken, the thorn fang symbol that had meant something before he'd twisted it into a banner for corruption. He stood in chains one final time while Magnus pronounced the sentence. You are no one. You belong to no pack. You will wander as a rogue until your natural death, and when you die, no wolf will mourn you. No stone will mark your grave. You will be forgotten. Victor said nothing as they released him at the border, watching him disappear into the wilderness with empty eyes. Annie had insisted on being there, had needed to see this final moment. As his figure faded from view, she felt the weight of his threat finally lift from her shoulders. The 12 Omega children she'd saved refused to leave her side. The oldest, a girl named Sarah who was barely 13, had appointed herself Annie's unofficial bodyguard. The other children followed her lead, and gradually, the freed wolves joined them, former victims forming a protective circle around the queen who'd given them their freedom. Magnus tried to argue that she needed trained warriors, but Annie wouldn't hear it. They've survived things most warriors can't imagine, she said. Their loyalty isn't based on duty. It's based on choice. That makes them stronger than any army you could assign me. 3 months after Victor's defeat, Annie stood before the Council of Alphas and presented new legislation. Laws protecting Omegas from discrimination, guaranteeing them positions in pack hierarchies based on merit rather than birth rank, establishing sanctuaries for wolves who'd been abused by their packs. Some Alphas resisted. Change always met resistance, but when the sovereign queen spoke with the moon goddess's blessing burning on her shoulder, even the most traditional wolves found it difficult to refuse. Xander appeared during one of these council sessions, escorted by guards, his eyes downcast. He'd been arrested for his role in Victor's conspiracy, not a willing participant, but complicit through silence when he'd seen cursed wolves and said nothing. "Sovereign Queen," he said, kneeling before her. His voice was hollow, stripped of the arrogance she remembered. "I have no right to ask for mercy. I tormented you for years. I mocked you at the banquet. I knew something was wrong with Victor's wolves, and I stayed silent because speaking up would have cost me status." Annie studied the wolf who'd made her life miserable, seeing him clearly for the first time. Not a monster like Victor, just a weak wolf who'd valued his own comfort over doing what was right. "You're right," she said. "You don't deserve mercy. But I'm going to give it to you anyway, with conditions." She sentenced him to 5 years of community service, working in the Omega sanctuaries she'd established, serving the wolves he'd once dismissed as beneath him. "You'll learn what strength really means," she told him. "Not the kind that comes from rank or physical power. The kind that comes from surviving despite everything trying to break you." Xander accepted with tears streaming down his face, and Annie felt no satisfaction in his tears. Only hope that he might become better than he'd been. 1 year after the banquet that changed everything, Annie stood in the grand hall, rebuilt and gleaming with new stained glass windows depicting the sovereign moon mark. The coronation ceremony drew wolves from every territory, packs that had once warred with each other now united under a queen who'd proven strength wasn't measured by dominance. She wore a gown of silver that seemed to glow with its own light, her hand resting on the small swell of her belly where Magnus' air grew. The baby kicked as if sensing the moment's importance, and Annie smiled despite her nerves. Magnus stood beside her, his hand covering hers over their child, his presence steady and proud. The freed wolves lined the hall in their ceremonial guard uniforms, and the rescued children, older now, stronger, but still her fiercest protectors, stood at attention near the throne. Elder Miriam placed the crown on Annie's head, a circlet of silver and moonstone that caught the light and threw rainbows across the assembled wolves. "Rise, sovereign queen," Miriam said. "Protector of the realm, voice of the moon goddess, leader of all wolves." Annie rose, and the hall erupted in howls, not of submission, but of celebration. She looked out at the faces watching her and saw what she'd never imagined possible: acceptance, respect, hope. When the howls faded, she spoke. "A year ago, I stood in this hall as nobody, an Omega, wolfless, worthless in the eyes of wolves who measured worth by rank and bloodline." Her voice carried to every corner, amplified by the sovereign moon mark's power. "I was mocked, dismissed, and eventually corrupted by someone who wanted to use my power as a weapon. I spent days trapped in my own body, fighting from within while darkness tried to erase who I was." She paused, her hand tightening over her belly. "I'm standing here today not because I was unbreakable. I broke. Multiple times. But I learned something in that darkness. True strength isn't never falling. It's rising every time you're knocked down. It's choosing mercy when vengeance would be easier. It's believing you matter even when the whole world tells you you're worthless." The hall was silent, every wolf hanging on her words. "So, I make this promise to you as your queen. In this realm, worth will no longer be determined by rank at birth. It will be earned through character, through courage, through the choices we make when everything would be easier if we chose cruelty instead of compassion." The sovereign moon mark blazed with approval, and Annie felt the moon goddess's presence like a warm embrace. "We've all been broken by something. We've all fallen. But we're still here. Still standing. Still fighting. And as long as we rise together, nothing can keep us down." The howls that erupted this time shook the very foundations of the hall, and Annie knew with absolute certainty that she'd finally found where she belonged. Not as an Omega trying to earn her place, but as a queen who'd claimed it through surviving everything designed to destroy her. Magnus pulled her close as the celebration continued around them, his lips brushing her ear. "I'm so proud of you." Annie leaned into him, feeling their child move between them, feeling the completed bond singing with joy, and smiled. "We did this together," she said. "All of us. The broken, the forgotten, the ones who refused to stay down." And in that moment, surrounded by wolves who'd chosen to follow her not because they had to, but because they believed in what she represented, Annie Graves, Sovereign Queen, former Omega, survivor, finally understood what true power meant. It meant rising, again and again and again, until the world had no choice but to see you standing.